Hello friends, welcome back to my channel where I talk about anything and everything through a mindful lens. Today I want to get personal again, just chat and share my story with anxiety and how I overcame it, because it seems like in this day and age, every person you talk to either is struggling with depression or anxiety, and I'm really no exception to that. So hopefully through this video you can feel seen and find some comfort and know that I've been in your shoe before, and that I'm also living proof that anxiety is something that really doesn't need to define you for the rest of your life. So I've always been an anxious prone kid growing up, and one of the most common things I would hear from my parents or my teachers is that you think too much or stop worrying, which in hindsight probably wasn't helping with anxiety, but I don't blame them. They really tried their best, and what we know about anxiety now is nowhere near what we knew before. But as a highly sensitive person who grew up with an extreme case of eczema, so think like constant open wounds from scratching or redness all over the body, and you can actually probably kind of see it now with my fingers. My alarm for safety has always been more heightened than most people, and I remember growing up and always envying the chill kids and who could take things easily, because that was something I could never do. So whether that was my skin always flaring up or just feeling overwhelmed constantly by school and life, I always felt like having worries was actually just natural and a part of me, so almost like a personality trait and a defining factor of me. And despite me saying that now I have moved on from anxiety defining me, I think it was actually a necessity for me growing up. Even though it was obviously very unpleasant, it also helped train my self-discipline to take care of myself, whether that was through like moisturizing my skin or staying away from triggers that caused my flare-ups. The anxiety in some way was my compass to keep me safe. But as we grow older and become more aware of our own emotions and mental states, that was when I actually started noticing that in many ways the anxiety was actually getting in the way of living my life. I had all the common forms of modern day anxiety, so whether that be social anxiety, the generalized anxiety disorder, or even in a point in my life when anxiety would cripple me and debilitate me, where I would spend hours in my room and just feel like paralyzed and maybe like I was actually going to die. And it was through those moments that I realized that this amount of worrying is actually not normal, and it's actually the anxiety that is causing me to always feel like it was overpowering my life. It's normal to have worries, that's just part of human nature. And even the most relaxed and happiest people still have worries, but being driven and dictated around by them 24/7 is not only very tiring, but also not building that sense of peace that I really wanted in my life. But because I just thought it was so normal for me, because it was something that I grew up with and that's all I've ever known, I really didn't do much about it and just thought that this anxiety was just what drives me and ensures my safety and even success in this world. And I think that's how a lot of people with high functioning anxiety feel as well. But it got really bad in 2017 and 18 when I graduated from college and started adulting and started working in the corporate setting. During that time, I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, besides knowing that I wanted to work in fashion and kind of rise up the ranks in fashion. So I kind of forced myself into a fashion media company that was really well known just for the reputation, despite not really knowing anything about the role. And on top of that was doing my genderless fashion blog on the side to build that brand and see where it could go. And that first job particularly was super difficult because the company itself was super cutthroat and not very new grad friendly. So everyone was really in it for themselves, so it's super hard to navigate, and it was almost impossible to find a network unless you try tirelessly to meet people day in and day out. And I was just in a product role which I knew absolutely nothing about, and so was just really in this endless loop of feeling like I wasn't good enough, that I didn't know what I was doing in the job, and also really lacked the resources to really know that being good at the job was even a possibility. So while dealing with that pressure, I also forced myself to work excessively hard on the side to overcompensate on my fashion blog for that sense of not being good at my job. So what that looked like was constant planning and always like 10,000 things on my to-do list during the weekends, even though they're really supposed to be used for resting, and add Sunday scaries, or it actually felt more like Sunday doomies in those moments. That was when I got myself really into deep trouble. I would say that this would happen once or twice every month on the weekends, where I would set myself out to do the 10 bajillion things on my to-do list, whether that's the errands or doing the blog stuff. but finding myself really crippled by my anxiety and just really stuck in my room and not being able to do anything about it. I wouldn't say that it's like full-blown panic attacks per se, but really resemble them in many ways. So I would really feel myself really tense up and feel like I was really trapped in my anxiety and thinking that there just really isn't a way out of it. And I'd say that they lasted about 30 minutes at best to even a few hours at worst. And so during that year when I was having those episodes, that was when I was like, okay, Matt, you really got to do something about it because I can no longer emotionally and physically handle this anymore. And can't just live in this constant state of fear knowing that the relapses are going to come and it's only a matter of time before another episode strikes me again. So it was through a few years worth of work, but that frequency eventually faded, and I would say that I never had any one of those hyper anxious episodes again after I left that job, but was still plagued with that anxiety constantly for the years after, and just knew that it wasn't really serving me and really wanted to, just like get it out of my life. It really wasn't until last year in 2021 when I had a breakthrough year and was able to move past a lot of my fears driving the anxiety and start reclaiming that power over that anxiety and no longer let it gain control over, every second of my life. So I really wanted to share with you the tips that saved me out of the anxiety and really hope that they can help with your healing journey too. And that maybe you can also go from, being crippled by the anxiety to just living with anxiety to not even having to label yourself with that anxious label anymore. So first and foremost, it's really important to watch your stimulants. I think a lot of times when we don't gather the courage and really examine our fears, we think that anxiety is just part of us and feel like they can just come out of nowhere. But actually, in most cases, there's always a pattern of triggers or stimulants that are really leading you to feel that way. I mentioned in my story that I strongly resonate as a highly sensitive person, which, if you're new to this concept, was a term coined by Elaine Aron after doing years of extensive research that hypothesized that I want to say around 15 to 20% of the human population are actually genetically inclined to be more easily overstimulated as a survival mechanism. I'll link her book below in case you're wondering what it means, and maybe that could be you. But basically I pick up signals and stimulants and other external factors much faster and easier than other people. But on the flip side, I'm also more easily affected and overwhelmed by them. So for example, for some people, a night out is just what they need to recharge. But for me, that really is a recipe for disaster, trying to make sense of the overwhelming stimulants that comes with socializing or reading social dynamics and loud street noises, etc., etc. But either way, I don't think you need to be an HSP for stimulants to trigger your anxiety. I like to think of our lives as a continuing spectrum of input and output, and inputs in this case could be stimulants that trigger our alarm system and puts us into that anxious and constant worrying mode. So for example, for me, the worst repeating offender is caffeine when I don't need it. When I was going through those episodes and anxiety attacks out of college, it was always because I had too much caffeine, thinking that it will actually help me to get through the 10,000 things I needed to do on my to-do list. But when I already was feeling that sense of overwhelm from the excessive amount of things, the caffeine actually flipped the switch and actually caused me to spiral and trigger those anxious episodes. I think a lot of times we turn to substances like caffeine or alcohol or even drugs to power through or to avoid and drown our anxieties, but anything that causes spikes or dips in your temperaments are actually stimulants that you should really be cautious of. They tend to heighten your sense of alarmedness and signal to your mind and body that you are not safe, and actually amplify your fears even more until the persistent worry just plagues you overall. So actually any well-intention to aid those anxious moments with substances actually most likely worsens your escape or your coping mechanism. So I think another thing to think about when it comes to stimulants is that they can be circumstantial and not always related to substances. So I mentioned that for me it was the overwhelming to-do list that were part of the triggers as well. And this could really apply to, any stressful periods in your life, whether that's during an exam period, a difficult work period, or just even certain people in your life who tend to instigate or trouble your temperaments. So I know not all of those things are technically avoidable, but if you know you're in or entering a stressful period in your life, then being extra mindful of those circumstances will help you manage the stress, so you know when to take those needed breaks or downtime so you don't further amplify your anxiety. So I think these are also prime time to pay extra attention to substances. So know that you have the permission permission to turn down that party or the after work happy hour if you know that those environments are actually conducive to consuming those substances that actually will start spiraling your worries. So really take a step back to reflect on the trends and the patterns and the stimulants that have repeatedly triggered your anxieties and worries, and know that you have the permission to take breaks from them or avoid them altogether in the context of substances, so that over time the less stimulants there are that are driving your anxiety, the less worries will feel sticky and feel like they are just plaguing your everyday life. And the second tip that really helped me overcome my anxiety is to let go of the expectations of needing the anxiety to go away immediately. I know this one might sound a little counter to our instincts, but really trust me on this one. When you deny yourself the chance to sit with anxiety, it will actually stick around longer and taunt you for the days and even the years ahead. I spoke about this in my going through a tough time video, but our inner cheerleader or our ego really has our best interests and intentions to stay safe and even well, but as a result, it also diminishes and undervalues the experience that your anxiety brings. I think it's really easy to confuse staying well and always staying positive with the need to actually tend to our anxiety's cries, and the more that we actually diminish and ignore its cries so we can actually just move on with life, the louder it will actually become over time. So I like to think of our anxieties as that crying baby who really doesn't know how to communicate with language yet. So it communicates mostly through crying. When the baby, say, is hungry or wants loving attention, all the baby knows is to basically cry to get mom's or dad's attention for them to tend to them and basically give them some love. So I think we've all seen those baby clips or know of a baby who knows kind of how to like strategically cry, and the moment that they're tended to or looked after, they actually start crying all together and maybe even start laughing. So, you know, they kind of know more than what you think we do. And essentially that's the same thing as our anxiety. It's basically our crying child who just really wants attention. And the more that we as the inner wise adult ignores and dismisses that baby's cry, the more the baby will actually just continue to, you know, throw tantrums and disrupt your peace. So imagine yourself as that nurturing parent to that anxiety and think about what the anxiety is actually asking of you, whether it's love or compassion or even just simple, straightforward attention. When you actually don't feel the rush to just fulfill the expectation to just dismiss and shoo away your anxiety, you'll actually find that ironically it will stop triggering itself sooner. And also I think on the flip side, when we try to push away the anxiety as part of that expectation for the worries to just go away ASAP and find that we actually cannot control it, and when we find that we are not able to control it, it actually spirals your anxiety for the worse. When you start doubting your own worth and your ability to look after yourself. And the next thing you know it, the anxiety becomes a full-blown thing and you feel like you just really surrender to your inner demon. So for example, one of the things that really helped me in 2021 during my breakthrough year with my anxiety is when I start noticing that my worries are kind of just, you know, starting to chase its own tail. I first need to catch my own dismissiveness in trying to push it away so I can slow down and really tend to it, to pay attention to it, to show that I care for it with the time that I could theoretically be using to be productive, and also start examining where the anxiety is coming from, which I'll touch on in a later point. And I think another part of letting go of this expectation to get past the anxiety ASAP is to actually also be mindful of the goals that we have set ourselves out to do and accomplish that actually impose a sense of the timeline that really doesn't give ourselves space for us to tend to our anxieties. For example, in my first year out of college, I spiraled into those anxiety attacks because I was trying to rush towards myself towards those goals and really didn't factor in self-care time for my anxiety. I think when we feel constantly driven to reach success and accomplish the goals that we set ourselves out to do, that actually feeds into the dismissiveness and the rush to dispose of our anxious and worrying thoughts. So really be mindful of when you're trying to shoo away your worries and anxieties, because it'll actually only come back and bite you in the ass and actually, you know, worsen your performance in the goal that you're trying to accomplish in the first place. So really take it seriously and make the time to care for your anxiety and actually pay attention to it while it's crying is actually going to accelerate your path to what you're trying to accomplish. And over time, you know, when the anxiety subsides, when it finds the love and the attention that it deserves, it'll also allow you to live that best life that you were actually seeking in the first place. The third tip that really helped me overcome my anxiety is knowing that you are not your thoughts. For those who are newer to mental health or perhaps spirituality, this may sound a little bizarre, but hear me out. So essentially the way that we are today is a really complicated mix of the things that we've been told by others and by society, and even the lies that we feed ourselves. But what we usually consider as conscious thinking actually has a lot of roots in unconscious biases that we didn't even play a role in writing that story. And I think for many of us, the most common and prevalent source is from our childhood, where when we're children and are particularly prone to harm and sensitive to threats, and therefore our nervous systems are always screaming danger and danger all the time, we accommodate and we assimilate really hard towards our environment to ensure our survival. And what that looks like is inherently a lot of self-limiting beliefs and even behavioral challenges that we carry into our adulthood. And so we can often catch ourselves thinking, why do I react this way, or why do I think this way? So for example, if our emotional needs were not met at a young age, that can manifest in many ways, one of which the most common ones is anxiety, since that's really our mind and body telling us that we don't have a good way of handling through those worries and through those fears, because maybe perhaps we didn't grow up with the influence of our parents showing that we can actually cope or manage them through. So for example, I grew up in Taiwan and actually went to Taiwanese local school from kindergarten to 3rd grade. And so for those of you who don't know, it's pretty common for East Asian local schools to be really ultra competitive about academics and actually rank the kids based off their grades. So despite my mom being super aware of that and still allowing me to watch TV and have playtime or even downtime, which actually other parents reprimanded her for, which is kind of crazy, I was still nevertheless fed that narrative that I need to accomplish certain grades to be celebrated or loved in a social setting. So growing up with that influence, that translates to my unconscious thoughts thinking that I am only worthy and lovable if I'm successful and reach certain milestones that define success. And anything less than that means that I'm a failure and undeserving of love from others, but also from myself. So that nurture continued to feed into my adulthood and fed into my psyche, especially towards that year when I had the severe anxiety attack, since part of what drove that anxiety was actually, me beating myself down for not doing enough if I wasn't being productive enough on the weekends. And I wasn't able to get out of that spiraling cycle because I really wasn't aware of the influences that was running beneath my pulse. But over the last years, I continued to disidentify with my inherent beliefs that really weren't serving me and busting those thoughts that I thought were actually coming from within me. The anxieties that I had for many years actually went away pretty quickly. When you learn to see past those unkind and judgmental thoughts that are happening within you when you're feeling anxious, you'll actually start noticing that a lot of those narratives and those worries carry a source that you actually had no play in building. And as part of shedding light on those thoughts that you thought were you'll notice that sometimes the crybaby is actually just crying wolf, and that yes, it's asking for your attention, but beyond that, it also might be asking you to dissect those beliefs. It's kind of like when someone says something not kind to you and you know how to stand up for yourself and say, hey, that's not true. And that's really the same thing that you're doing with yourself when you notice that your anxiety is feeding you those really negative thoughts. So even if that doesn't really fully make sense to you, one simple thing that really helped me is to ask yourself, are those thoughts really me? When you're finding yourself endlessly feeling a little worried or anxious, challenge your thoughts a little and listen to what your anxiety is actually telling you. When you question your thoughts from that perspective, you're investigating whether those thoughts are actually true representations of you. And when you can see past them, the anxiety or the crybaby will actually start naturally muting itself too. And while you're learning to question your thoughts, another thing that really helped me overcome anxiety is to journal your thoughts and worries. I think we all know what anxiety feels like when our thoughts and worries are just playing ping pong back and forth and back and forth. And a lot of times it feels like a broken record, just, reciting the same thing verbatim and not really getting anywhere with them. When we don't have an outlet for those worries, we can easily become addicted to those worries until the anxieties actually just become us. And I say journal, not rant to your friends, because you really want your thoughts out on a neutral and impartial medium. I think many times our friends really have our best interest and they really just want to be there for you and help, but everyone also has their own thoughts that are guided by their own unconscious beliefs, which we just talked about. So sometimes there's only so much that they can help you with. I'm not dismissing that outlet entirely, but just know that your friends are also humans and that they're also dealing with their own stuff, and that sometimes, how they cope is not going to be the best advice for you on how to cope with your anxieties as well. So journaling really is your best friend to have an outlet for. I found that when I actually started jotting down and journaling down all my thoughts, that one, I was actually able to better question my unconscious beliefs, and that two, that I was no longer alone, because the words and the weight that my anxieties carry no longer just have to live in my head. I really had a place to turn to no matter how I was feeling, and knew that the journal was always going to be there for me to find that clarity and for me to sort through my worries and my fears. I think when we're really deep into the weeds of our own anxious thinking, It's very much this power struggle for fight for control where, your thoughts are trying to control you and your inner nourishing self is also trying to control the thoughts so they don't become intrusive. So, obviously that's very mentally taxing and drains a lot of energy out of you. So really writing down your thoughts on your journal is that outlet to let go of those battles that you no longer need to hold on to. And for me, it's also really the time for me to reflect back on the 3 points that we just talked about. So 1, what stimulants triggered me, and 2, why did I react the way I did to my anxiety and was I being present for it, and 3, what underlying beliefs was my anxiety telling me to work through. I'll include the journal prompts below, but those have always been the 3 guiding questions that really helped me discover so much profound insights about myself. And when that source of light starts shining on the truth and the root of my anxiety, a lot of those anxious things actually just suddenly went away. And like me, if you grow up always watching what you say or always thinking about what you say before you raise your hand, this is actually not the time to do that. Really be honest with yourself, don't hold back, don't shame your own thoughts, and really let yourself write down verbatim what your thoughts and what your anxiety really has to say. The more that you can be honest with yourself and really transcribe those thoughts onto paper or Word doc or in the Notes app, the clearer the thoughts will actually jump out at you and you'll start having that razor sharp quality of being able to identify your triggers and really your self-limiting beliefs that really plagues and really drives your anxieties. If you're new to journaling, it might not come as naturally, but I promise that over time you'll find it really, really cathartic and you'll look back on your life and wondered, where has journaling been all my life? So up until this point, we've been talking about the mental work to help you overcome with your anxiety. So I really wanted to shift gears a little and move on to things that are also more on the physical side, because anxiety isn't just limited to just the mind. If you think about when you get anxious or in more intense situations and have panic attacks, your body actually tenses up and has a series of physical reactions, like you might start sweating or you might start feeling trapped, and those are really just prime examples of how closely your mind and body work together and that they really are the same thing, and just focusing on the mind and even the emotions itself isn't going to cover the full spectrum of what it means to heal from anxiety. The first and most fundamental tip is to really focus on your breath work. When we start feeling anxious and our body starts feeling like it's constricted and just really crouching in, part of what our body is trying to tell us is actually that we really need to breathe, to take a deep inhale and a deep exhale. I think sometimes we're so quick to dismiss such an easy strategy because it's like so obvious that we humans know how to breathe, but it can be really radically transformative. Part of what's happening when we're spiraling with our worries is that actually our whole system, including our mind and our body, becomes identified with the worries and they overtake our whole presence. So focusing on the breath is really giving our body the permissions to let the oxygen and the energy in and out and in and out. When we focus on our breath, it's really giving ourselves the gentle reminders of the breaks and that we also have a body and that the thoughts and the worries are not the only thing that define us. And when we start taking those breathing breaks, it also makes a mental note for us to really disidentify with our anxieties and help shift the balance of the control from our triggered minds and body back to our nurturing selves. I think when we're so stuck in our heads about our anxieties, and even when our body starts demonstrating some symptoms, we can actually easily forget that we have a body, because our whole attention has been redirected to our mind, which in my mind is also crazy in terms of an evolutionary fault of ours. So when I really focused on breathing in deeply and exhaling deeply, then that made things feel okay. The overwhelming sense of responsibilities or even accomplishments that I felt like I needed to do became much more manageable, because each breath reminded me to just take things breath by breath and step by step and even day by day. And that really the thoughts that conquered my mind when I started spiraling were really just not me. I even had a friend who used to get full-blown panic attacks, and one thing that really just struck me and stuck with me was when she mentioned that her therapist reminded her to actually breathe the next time she felt like she was on the verge of a panic attack. And actually when she tried that the next time, she told me that afterwards she never had a panic attack again. So obviously everyone's experience with it will be a little different, but really don't underestimate the power of shifting your awareness and your attention to your breath. It's probably one of the most significant and also the most important first steps that is really the easiest way to alleviate ourselves of the fears and stresses that are piling up within us. And you might also notice that I said breath work, not meditation, because I feel like sometimes if you're new to meditation, that can feel like a daunting task. task. But really just focusing on your breath, which itself is a form of meditation, will really help transform you and help you overcome your anxieties. And really one last and final tip, which is so basic but so important, is to really rest, exercise, and eat well. Allow me to play mom for a bit. Essentially, when we let our worries and anxieties plague our bodies and mind, it's really easy to feel overwhelmed and feel like we don't have a good grip on managing our relationship with anxiety. And so it's really easy to go down the route of neglecting some of the basic nutritional and bodily needs that are actually so important for our day-to-day mental and physical health. And because obviously everyone is also at different stages in their own mental health journeys, this point is particularly beautiful because it is so universal. You don't actually need to have a good understanding of your subconscious mind that are driving your anxieties and fears for you to actually rest and exercise and to eat well. So for example, with the rest, we all know that sleep is good for you, but we all violate that principle just way too often, you know, telling ourselves that just one more scroll or one more video or one more chapter and then we'll go to bed. But in the context of anxiety, lacking in the sleep and rest has obvious health consequences like, you know, weakened immune systems, abrupt mood changes, and trouble thinking and concentrating, which are not going to aid you in terms of your emotional and mental healing with anxieties. Basically, it's better to rest up than not. When your body and mind don't get enough rest, you really won't be able to respond to the outside world and the stimulants appropriately. Something that might seem really small and trivial might actually trigger a full-blown anxiety attack because our nervous system didn't get the rest that it needed and really blew things out of proportion. And we may not even realize that that's actually just us not getting enough sleep. So giving your body and mind is a preventative measure, but also a long-term maintenance habit that will really also help curb and help with your anxiety. And the same goes for eating well, where eating a well-balanced, nutritious diet, so you know, rich in vegetables, fruits, and whole grains, and healthy fats, are going to nourish your mind and body to be able to respond more appropriately to your environment and also aid in that mental clarity. So for example, think about when you get hangry, you're actually not thinking straight and throw tantrums or tempers randomly, and the moment you get your food, you actually forget about them. It's really the same with anxiety, so make sure you feed yourself appropriately with the good nutrition so you don't end up unnecessarily anxious because you didn't really pay attention to your bodily needs. And finally, with exercise, I think exercise accomplishes the same thing as eating and sleeping well, but also has an additional benefit that I think can really help you. Because exercising is so physical and really demands your whole body's attention to it, I found that it really competes and wins over our mind's attention to just fixate on the anxieties. And afterwards, we also get those benefits from the endorphins from exercising. It really helps lift our moods temporarily. And I sometimes find that when I really drag my ass to the gym while those thoughts persist, that sometimes the thoughts actually just disappear after I work out, or even during the workout, I find some really profound insights about my anxieties, both of which are actually just physically carves out that space so our mind isn't just so fixated on those worries and those fears. And afterwards, when you do calm down and have more mental capacity, you can start seeing those thoughts more clearly and not feel entirely trapped and overrun by them. Those were the 6 tips that really helped me overcome my anxiety to a point now where I don't even feel like I need to label myself with anxious anymore. I know that having anxiety is really a lot to manage, and when your worries overrun you like a full-time job, it can be extremely taxing. But I hope that these tips can really help guide you through your anxiety, so over time you might not even need to label yourself as anxious or anxious prone anymore as well. And really just know that you can do this and that you really have the ability to shift that power back to yourself, so that crying baby and its underlying limiting beliefs no longer have to define you. When you water yourself with enough love and attention and insights and physical care, the anxiety will actually start withering away. Sooner or later, you'll find the seeds of peace and happiness start sprouting. If you found this video helpful, I would really appreciate a like and subscribe, and even a share for a friend who might find this video really helpful. And until then, take care.